Hi guys, Grant Nelson again here with the Mustache Off-Grid YouTube channel. In case you're new to the channel, I live off-grid in southern Missouri in a log cabin I built by hand. I try to promote off-grid living, self-sufficiency, and preparedness. Anyway, I'm going to get right into it here as I usually do. I'll put the email somewhere on the video here so that you guys can email the channel with topics, questions, or maybe just to say hi if you want. Anyway, a lot on my mind these days. I mean, it's crazy. It seems like there's, you know, a month's worth of, or a year's worth of news every week. You know, I remember back in 2015 and before, it seemed like, you know, you'd get a news story every 3 or 4 months. That was a big deal, like a war or an assassination or things like that. It would be like every 6 months something would happen, maybe even every year. And then sometime around 2020, after Joe Biden got elected, and maybe even before that, maybe 2019, I'd say, it seemed like there's just news and hype and all kinds of stuff it seems like every weekly, like yearly events that used to happen once a year, happening every week. Regardless of that, I have my opinions on the government, Congress. I'm actually very pro-government. I think that we need a government. I think that the main thing about me being pro-government is I want a government that is by the people, for the people, and that makes decisions that are right for the people, and not just the elites or the rich, or foreign countries. So that's my opinion on the government. I like the government. I just want them to make decisions that are in America's best interest. If I was fidgeting here, there's a tick on me. And I think most people would feel that way. You know, I had some comments in last week's video, and they were talking about, well, I'm going to get into that later here. But I wanted to talk a little bit about my opinions on the government and the elites and some of the secret societies of the world, and get a little deeper into some of that stuff. Me personally, I believe that there are secret societies that all have like one greater one controlling them, which I believe very well may be the Illuminati, which apparently, allegedly, probably doesn't exist according to some, but then others say it does exist, and there's all conspiracy around that. But I believe that there is a shadow government of some sort run by the elites of the world and the secret societies of the world that runs our government. I believe probably that got heavily implemented even to a higher extent during the Roosevelt administrations back in the 40s, maybe even before that, and maybe even some in Teddy Roosevelt's term as well, and maybe even some between that. Regardless of all that, my opinion is, I think the agencies control Congress and the executive branch of government. I think they were created exactly to do just that. The creation of the CIA and the FBI and all those agencies back in the 20s through the 40s and 50s, and the things that they engaged in make me tend to believe that to an extent. You look at Operation Artichoke, and then JFK gets assassinated 10 days later. And I don't think Congress is real. I think it's kind of just a show. I think some of them might come in there real. I think that how you get on the ballot is that lobbyists put a lot of money behind your campaign, generally speaking. Sure, there is some rural areas, it's a gravel truck on the road. There is some rural areas where candidates run unopposed. But generally speaking, most of the candidates in Congress come from a wealthy background, legal backgrounds. Some of them, they get a bunch of money behind them, and then generally that pays for their campaign so that they can win. And generally speaking, whichever candidate has the most money behind them is the one that's going to win, generally speaking. Sure, there's one-off scenarios, but the one-off scenarios aren't enough to actually make up for the reality of it. The candidates that we as the people vote on are selected for us. Sure, they say, oh, well, that was in the primary, and there was like 7 candidates in the primary. Well, those 7 candidates in the primary were put there by someone. So, and it wasn't me. I didn't pick them. You didn't pick them. Generally, it's the lobbying groups that pick them. They put money behind them. They show them how to run. Sometimes it's family ties, whatever. But generally speaking, we get to vote on the guys that they pick for us. And what I was going to get into beyond that is Thomas Massie. He had his campaign in Kentucky, and he lost. And, you know, he was one of the few in Congress that stood for a lot of the same things that I believe in. You know, he was very pro-Second Amendment, although not as pro-Second Amendment probably as he should be, as they all are. He was very, he lived off-grid. He was big into the self-sufficiency movement. If you look into any of that stuff, him and Joel Salatin were talking about joining the USDA in advisory roles and other things like that. But he's been big in the self-sufficiency movement and promoting some bills and laws, at least the illusion of them in Congress, where it would create more freedoms for the American farmers and the rural Americans and the homesteading communities of the world, which he's a homesteader. He's big on the raw milk thing. He's put out some statements on it and stuff. So anyway, I like him for at least the personality I've seen of him on TV and online. And when I say TV, I mostly mean online, because I don't have a TV, nor do I want one. That being said, you know, I talked in one of my previous videos that, you know, he was one of the few people trying to put out the Epstein files. And you look at that whole ordeal, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, they're out of Congress now. Whether you believe they were selected, elected, however it is, it seems like anyone that wanted that done on the Republican side is getting ousted, which is all part of the show. All part of the show. And you look at the guy that lost to that beat Thomas Massie. He wants a draft for the Iran war, says that openly. How nuts is that? First off, we should never want to draft unless it's absolutely necessary. And, I mean, there's a lot of older Americans I've talked with that really think that we should have more drafts and more draft. And I'm not for that, by the way. I think that if you have a war that's worth fighting, people will join. And that's how our country started, with a volunteer army. And yeah, it was hard, but they won. And if it's something that's worth fighting for, people will join. Maybe not when you've got DEI and woke military like we had, and they're trying to undo that now. But like I said, it's all a show. It's all a show. And I don't necessarily know how much of it I believe and how much is real and how much is fake. And what you're seeing and what you're told from the White House and from the news and clips on Facebook is probably just a fraction of the truth. A fraction of it with some fake reality mixed in. That's just my opinion. What's the real truth and what's the real reality? The American people don't get access to that information. A lot of people don't know, by the way, that we actually have a second government. In case there's a national emergency or things like that, they actually have a second government picked out for us to be put in place. And that is a fact. That's not a conspiracy. I believe it's based out in Virginia, possibly Connecticut, somewhere up in the Northeast. But there are unelected representatives ready to be put in place as the president and the second government. If our government ever gets taken out. And there's conspiracy around how much power those people actually have, and like a shadow government around the government that we see. It's kind of interesting when you look at like departments in government like the OMH and they're unelected bureaucratic positions. And I'm not even sure if they're still around, but I think they probably are. But in Trump's first term, they caused him a lot of problems. And those guys, some of them have been in office 30, 40 years, and they seem to think that they actually run the American government. So we have government behind the elected government pushing the actual government that is elected around. So that's kind of interesting. Look into it yourself, research it, it's real. I'm actually reading Charlie Kirk's book, and he was talking about the OMH in there and how much of a problem that caused Trump in his first term. Like I said, I question how much of it's real, how much of it's fake, how much of it's propaganda, but if you want to, you have to believe some part of reality, I guess, of what you see, some part of it. Question it, but at least know what the consensus is. But Thomas Massie lost. He was one of the big guys in the self-sufficiency movement. He lost to a guy that really wants war. A war that 70% of Americans oppose, by the way. And the amount of foreign money that came in that House race, that race was bought. And it's also crazy to me, if you look at the last 4 or 5 elections in Kentucky for that same House seat, there was like 66,000 votes in the last election. This one, in the primary, this one there was 105,000 votes. I mean, that just seems like a lot to me. And there's also questions with the over 60 crowd, which is allegedly who was voting for this Ed Gallerin guy. And as far as that goes, there's questions on how many ballots compared to how many people were actually registered in that age range. So I question that whole thing. I question it. But if it's real that Thomas Massie lost that election fair and square, and we have to say that it is real, what does that say about the American voter, the American person's average intellect? I mean, this was a guy bipartisan. I don't see how... I mean, the only times that he opposed something in Congress was when Congress was actually doing something that they literally ran that they wouldn't do. They ran on releasing the Epstein files, then none of them wanted to release them, and they made all kinds of excuses. They run on, pro-gun and pro-Second Amendment things, and then they pass gun control legislation. There's a bunch of other ones, but you could go down the list. The budget. They ran on, we're going to balance the budget. We're going to pay down the debt with these tariffs, and Doge is going to find all this fraud. And they increased the spending. And Thomas Massie opposed the spending bill that had the government shut down. And they say, well, he's not Make America Great Again because he's opposing Trump. First off, you run on certain things, you need to do them. And second off, we don't live in a monarchy where you just have undying loyalty to a president. We live in a constitutional democratic republic with elected representatives. And it's just crazy to me. It's just crazy that he's out of there. All the money behind it just surprises me. And, even though I think that he was just an actor like the rest of them, he was one of the few I do think was actually standing up for the Constitution and what it says and the things he ran on, which is rare. And that's why he's not there anymore, because anytime you actually do what you say in government and don't appease the foreign interest and the lobbyists, they're going to replace you. Not me and you watching are going to replace him. The lobbyists and the foreign entities are going to replace him, and that's what we saw right there. Whether it's done with fraudulent voting or whether it's done with campaigning people or whatever needs to be done, they're going to get you out of there. Even assassination, probably. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to get into, I just felt like rambling about that a little bit, and you let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. By the way, the DOJ, Department of Justice, the FBI, they are required by law to release all the Epstein files, and they are 150 days past the deadline they had to do it. Unredacted. To the American people. So, I'm going to get into the next topic here. I had an interesting comment in one of my last videos, and I'd say the comments, generally give me something to talk about sometimes. And one of the comments talked about preparing to be brought back to the Stone Age and the Bronze Age, and basically that's how they were setting up their self-sufficiency and their homesteading, and I try to get as close to that as I can. I don't know if we can really get to a level in modern society legally that way. However, you can get pretty close to like tribal, native type living. I tend to think that you're going to want some of the things that we have in the modern day if it ever gets to that time frame, things that make life a lot easier. I recently read a book, Ben Arnold, and I'm not talking about Benedict Arnold, the turncoat in the Revolutionary War. This is actually a different guy from the 1800s. He was a cowboy, trapper, gold miner, trail guide, and many other things. Soldier in the Civil War and the Indian Wars. He had some unbelievable stories, and I read a book, The Exploits of Ben Arnold, and it went through some of the hardships he had, and that was even with some technologies that in like Bronze Age, Stone Age style living, they wouldn't have even had. Something like a gun, or something like a metal knife, or something like flour. Things that we just take for granted every day. I talked in my last video about cheese and how it's kind of actually a delicacy in the historical sense, that we can just go to the store and get a block of it. Anyway, as far as that goes, guy was unbelievable, but some of his stories, people don't necessarily just know how good they actually have it today. And I'm actually thankful that I can go to the store and get a bolt, or I can go to the gas station and get gas, or use a chainsaw, or certain things that actually make life a lot easier. You could argue, oh, you're not fully off-grid if you're using a few of those things. I have the ability to work around them if I ever couldn't use them. However, you got to do what makes sense from a monetary standpoint, efficiency standpoint, and to get you closer to self-sufficiency. It only makes sense. For example, if you're going to spend 10 hours cutting wood with a handsaw, or you're going to spend 1 hour cutting the same wood with a chainsaw, that difference of time compared to the $2 or $3 in gas that you're going to use in the chainsaw, maybe $2 or $3 in oil, it only makes sense logically if you have the ability. Now, everyone's got different abilities and levels of what they want and how they want to do things as far as self-sufficiency and living off-grid. But I thought about this Stone Age concept and living in the Stone Age, and some of the stories from the book, The Exploits of Ben Arnold. And I looked at some of the third world countries around the world, somewhere like Cuba, some of the communist countries, China, Russia, Saharan Africa. I remember I watched the video one time in Saharan Africa, and the women in the village were taking soy meal and they were making a certain block out of it, and they were boiling it in, I think, some sort of oil, and making kind of a soy cheese that people could eat of some sort, because obviously they didn't have dairy available, which that seemed like pretty tough living out there, but I'm sure it wasn't as bad if you're actually living there and you actually have freedom, and you don't have a lot of extra obligations. Your obligations are mostly for survival and growing your garden and self-sufficiency. That's your main obligations. But as far as that goes, that type of third world countries, even somewhere like Cuba, you can get a gallon or two of gas still as a Cuban citizen right now. Nick Shirley made a video and he went over there, and most of the people had cell phones actually. So they have some form of electricity, and they have some sort of a store, but it's hard to get the things from the store you need. There's not a lot of them, a lot of stuff, but maybe you can get some flour, some sugar, a small amount of it. And, you know, I made a pint of black walnut syrup, 1 pint jar, and it took me probably at least, I'd say, 40 to 50 hours of labor to make that 1 pint jar of black walnut syrup. Honeybees, you know, can be a little bit better for a sweetener, but regardless of that, I'm just talking about the amount of labor that goes into producing these products by hand instead of mechanized farming and agriculture. And I think one of the scenarios that people don't prep for as much is somewhere in between. You know, some people are preparing for a complete Bronze Age collapse, which we should all be prepared for that, nuclear fallout type of deal. But there's a lot of people that aren't preparing for something in the middle. You look at like ancient Rome and some of the lost technologies and knowledge, maybe with the burning of the Library of Alexandria and other places like that. You wonder how much knowledge has been lost to history and time from that period, but how much has also been retained. I don't think that society as a whole is going to go completely fully Bronze Age, unless you don't comply. You know, looking at these socialist countries, I think you're still going to have some of the amenities, although it's going to be somewhat miserable still. And you're probably going to have some of the technologies, although it's still going to be a hard way of living. Which technologies, how much, and what you get, you know, that's all the question. But if we went from a free country to a socialist country, I think we'd still have some stuff. There'd still be a grocery store, but your options would be much less. And what you could get at that store would not be your choice. You'd only get a certain ration amount. Kind of like in World War II when there was rations. People had to ration certain goods and they had certain limits on how much they could take. And I tend to believe that was a test for exactly what FDR wanted for the long term of the country. And he could get away with it because of World War II. That being said, I kind of just think that there is an in-between where we're still going to have some of those things. Like when Tucker Carlson went over to Russia, and I don't trust Tucker Carlson, but when he went over there, he went to the grocery store and he was showing their grocery stores in Russia. And he bought some bread and some other things, and the fact that that stuff was there and they still had a marketplace might be something that's in between. And sure, there's a scenario where there's barter and trade, silver and gold, you know, that stuff, and that stuff goes on in a lot of those countries too, because there's a limited on what they actually can get. But I think a lot of preppers prepare for the absolute apocalypse, where you're living like a Native American tribe of old, basically, hunting and living off the land completely, which is fine to prepare for. That's good. But then there's a lot of people that don't prepare for the in the middle. And whether they're going to try to switch us over to digital currency or you're going to have to take the mark to get to that level. It's just an interesting thought to wonder the what ifs, the things that we don't know, and how many years it might take for our country to get to that level. Is it 5 years to get to that level? Is it 10 years? Is it 1 year? Is it 20 years? Is it 50 years? Is the question. And are we going to get to that level? I was thinking of another thing that a lot of people, at least in the prepping community, probably don't prepare for. And one was the in the middle. The second one that I thought of was, what if we're over exaggerating what's actually going on? We as Americans don't have all the information. What if nothing happens? You know, are you prepared? Obviously the middle class is shrinking. What if the dollar maintains some level of its value, you know, and it's still used for barter and trade at the store? What if it maintains some level of its value, hyperinflation wise? What if you can still get gas at the gas station, but it's $10 to $20 a gallon, like in some European countries? What if you could still get electricity, but it's $1,000 a month? You know, what if you can still go to the grocery store, but a gallon of milk is $20 or $30? A bag of flour is $20 or $30 for 10 pounds or a pound or whatever. What if there is still some level of normalcy, but the middle class just gets pinched where it's just tighter and tighter and tighter, and your dollar maintains some standard of the value that it still has, some standard of it? It's hyperinflation, but it's not like the Weimar Republic in Germany where you've got $1 million is equal to one, of the Zimbabwean scenario where it's basically worth nothing. What if it still has some level of value, where you can still get things, but they're really, really expensive, and the middle class just keeps getting pinched and pinched and pinched? Are we prepared for that type of a scenario? And what really can we do to prepare for that type of scenario? I think, you know, you have to have hard assets that are going to keep pace with inflation. Land, silver, gold. You know, if you still can maintain title to land and things like that, which is very realistic if the U.S. maintains some level of its governance and patent laws and things like that, title laws. I think that type of a scenario is very realistic. What if the dollar maintains some level of its value still, but it's way less and it sucks, and you can still get things, they're just really expensive? I think a lot of people don't think about that type of scenario as much as they should. Maybe they do, maybe I'm just over exaggerating, but I tend to think that some level of normalcy, some level, may still exist in a collapse scenario. And there's also a chance, although we all see the writing on the wall the way our country's being ran, there's also a chance that our country becomes a success. You know, and it's already a success, but it becomes more successful, and we maintain our power throughout the world. We are still the most powerful country in the world, and I do believe that, but we're kind of grasping onto it right now, and we've been weakened over the last 50 or 60 years for sure. But you know, these are just things to think about. What if we do continue to be the top dog in the world? And what if, as a nation, nothing happens? People keep going to their 9-to-5s, and they keep getting their income from that, and you know, how that works. We all know the dystopian style reality that the elites are kind of trying to sell us. That they're going to put in these data centers, and AI is going to replace all the jobs, and everyone's just going to have 100% free time where they don't have to work, and they can just stay home and cook breakfast and hang out, and they don't have to do anything, and they get a universal basic income. Socialism. That's what I think of when they're talking about this. And someone brought up that situation to me about a universal basic income. And I said, I think if they do that, the income would have to, the dollars that they do would have to be backed by something. That was my opinion on it. And they said, really, you think so? And I said, yeah, absolutely. But I don't know. Just some food for thought on scenarios, you know, people might not prepare for, and different things you could maybe find a way to at least think about them mentally and prepare for them from a logical perspective. I don't know. I don't know all the answers, but I don't live in fear of it. If I die for not accepting the mark of the beast and starve to death or something, I know where I'm going. You know, I believe in God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, Jesus Christ. And I believe that that's where I'm going when I die. And I try to be the best person I can in the eyes of God. And I do believe, you know, the term, you know, from the Bible, render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, that Jesus said briefly. That's not exactly what it said, but that's basically what it said. And many people take that term to believe that it means you should pay your taxes, which I do believe there's a really big argument for some sort of obedience in the Bible to God and to the government in that regard. If everyone rebelled against the government, there would never be any peace. And someone brought up taxes in one of my last videos, and you know, there's a lot less complaints about taxes. As much as I dislike taxes, there's a lot less complaints when goods are cheap, money's good, inflation's low, the economy's booming. There's a lot less complaints about taxes when that's the case. That's just an opinion. But also with that render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, if you look at the coin that they were presenting, that Jesus had in the Bible, the tribute penny they called it, that was a tribute to the Emperor of Rome, the Caesar of Rome. Tiberius was the Caesar, was the emperor at that time, and his father Augustus believed that he was part God, part man, just like the pagan style, like Hercules type of legends, half man, half God. Augustus, Tiberius's father, believed that he was part God, part man. According to historians, Tiberius didn't necessarily believe that, but if you look at the tribute penny, it said something, Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. And isn't that interesting? Makes you think son of God, like Christ, the same penny he was holding up. And there's some things I've read about this tribute penny potentially being paid at the temple by conquered nations, which the Jews were considered conquered by Rome at that time, as a tribute to that emperor, as if he were a god. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. I think both things are true. That you probably should pay your taxes. Try to be civil about things best you can, and also that taxes suck. I think everyone acknowledged that. That's why they were asking Jesus the question. And also, they knew that if he answered that question, he kind of talked around the question with his answer. He didn't say yes or no. He just stated the fact, give to Caesar what is due to Caesar and to God what is due to God. Let them determine that for themselves. If he answered that question, they would have put him to death right there. So he gave him kind of a parable in a way, as he often did with the Pharisees. Just a thought, just some interesting information on taxes I thought I'd discuss for the video. Maybe something to look into yourself and read a little bit about, and try to put down your own individual biases and think about it a little bit for yourself. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't think that that's the type of opinion that hurts anyone's feelings, I guess. And, you know, if you disagree with it, leave a comment. and or just you know, we can disagree and try to be friends like it used to be 10 years ago. So anyway, hope you all have a great rest of your day. I don't have much else to talk about. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching. I'm about to cook some radishes and some bacon on the fire. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching. God bless. Sit. Sit. Good boy. Good boy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Make Bailey famous for YouTube. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you for watching.